And so I got up and went for a run at 3 a.m, not thinking that I was going to aggravate the local service, which I did because they were surveilling me. And so, I go running out and I start picking up surveillance, and, they're scrambling to see where is this guy going at 3 a.m. I'm sure they thought I was going out to service a dead drop or some nonsense.
You're running. It's
Yeah.
not a casual stroll. Not that you were
No,
sprinting.
yeah. Well, I wasn't sprinting, I was jogging,
Right.
yeah. But so eventually I must have really aggravated him, because as I approached the square, and the square was, kind of still off limits. They were, and I don't remember exactly how long after it was, but eventually I got really close, and a uniformed member of their service stepped out from behind a corner, kind of lowered his rifle at me, and I quickly changed my mind, decided it was time to go back and go to sleep.
Welcome to the Where Have You Been podcast. I'm your host, Bill Ream, and each week on the pod, I have conversations with incredible guests from all walks of life. Expect to hear funny, crazy, emotional, life-changing, and even sometimes life-threatening stories and experiences that will entertain and inspire you. As always, I appreciate your likes, subscriptions, ratings, and reviews wherever you are listening. It doesn't sound like much, but it truly helps the pod get to the ears of more people who may enjoy it. And check out the website, whybpodcast.com, for links to the socials where you can find pictures from the guests and their stories, and also buy merch if you're so inclined. Now let's get to this week's episode. Thank you for being here.
All right, welcome back into another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast. As always, I'm your host, Bill Ream. I thank you for being here for this episode. You may roll your eyes a little bit as I will tell you that I have a yet another author on the pod. However, if you've listened to the other episodes with the authors that I've had, they've all been spectacular. And I am not to put any pressure on my guest today, but I think we're going to do just fine. What I will say is we've never yet had someone with his background, never yet had a former CIA agent on the podcast, and I don't know that I ever will again. So this is a special episode that we're having today. I have Scott on the podcast. Welcome, Scott. And if you don't mind, please tell the listeners, who are you?
Well, thank you, Bill, very much. I really appreciate you having me on. Yeah, my name is Scott Urbach. I'm, as you mentioned, a former CIA officer, and then since then, 40-year global security executive. And most recently, I have added author to my resume. I've written my first, to the shock of no one, CIA spy thriller novel called Admit Nothing, very loosely based on some of my assignments when I was in the agency.
And that was going to be my next question, is how much of it was based on your own experiences? Obviously, some of it kind of has to be, or else how else would you learn or know about some of the workings of the CIA?
Right. We would call it autobiographical fiction. So it's some of the assignments that the character, the protagonist, Grant Hunter, has are based on assignments that I had, interactions with people. My family members, my wife, and everyone are characters in the book. So everything that I say in the book about how the protagonist met his wife and their first date, and the fact that the director of Central Intelligence was at their wedding, et cetera, is all based in fact.
That's really awesome. That's really awesome. So you have the book. It's released. It's out there in the world, right?
It is. The first book in the series is called Admit Nothing, as I mentioned. It released in March, and I'm happy to say that I just submitted book 2, the manuscript for book 2, to the CIA. One unique challenge that I have, even though I've been out of the agency for over 30 years now, I'm still bound by my secrecy agreements that I signed way back in 1984, I think. So if anything I write, now if I were to write a cookbook, not an issue. But if I'm writing something that any way agency related, it has to be submitted to and approved by what's called the CIA Pre-Publication Classification Review Board. And they go through the manuscript line by line to make sure that I didn't inadvertently include any classified information, sources and methods, anything like that in the manuscript. Then they review it, they send me their redactions. Obviously, I make those redactions because I work very hard to make sure I'm not compromising anything that I know to be classified. And then I go into the editing process. So book 2 is with them, and I've just released the cover for that, and the title for that is Deny Everything, and that'll be out hopefully sometime in the fall.
That's awesome. So you are used to having, like, did you have a lot of redactions in the first book that, like,
I had a few.
And were you surprised at some of them?
I was definitely surprised at some of them. I had a few, and obviously, as I mentioned, I wasn't going to put anything in there that I knew to be classified.
Yeah.
But since I'd been out for 30 years, I mentioned a couple things that I thought had been declassified since then, and minor issues. Naming a name of a building that in the Washington D.C. area, and they had me redact that because I didn't think they used the building anymore. Apparently, either they do or they still didn't want it out there. So I redacted that and I changed the name of the building. A few other little things, they asked me to redact. The protagonist mentions that he worked in a specific office because it's written in the first person, and which was based on, they must have pulled my personnel file because it was based on where I worked. And that was an office that I know closed because it closed when I was still in the agency. But they made me redact that. So I just changed the name. I made up another office. And then they made me redact one thing that I completely made up. It was pure fiction. It was referencing a protective agent standing up near the director's suite, and the protagonist says, and I knew there to be a XYZ type of rifle in the knee well of that desk, which I completely made up. It wasn't there, but they made me redact that, which made me think, oh, geez, maybe I've been out 30 years. Maybe there is one there now, and I inadvertently put something in there.
Oh, gosh.
So, so it was an interesting process to go through initially, and I think with this one, there's less of that because the first book took place, a lot of it in and around headquarters. The second book takes place more overseas, so there's less of the ins and outs of the headquarters building than there was in the first book.
So cool. I'm sure that I could probably talk to you for a full hour and a half just about your experiences with the CIA, as much as you could possibly share, of course, but I digress. This is a travel pod.
This is a travel podcast. That's right.
Thank goodness the CIA also had you travel, so we can maybe talk about some things when you were working with the Bureau.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we get into your stories and experiences, I like to always make sure that my guest has the opportunity to throw out there for the listeners your website. I'm sure they can find your book on the website, where else they can maybe find that, and if you have any socials that you could share.
Sure. So the primary website is scotturbach.com. That's my author website, and so they can go there to read about the first book, Admit Nothing. Soon they'll be populated with information on the second book, Deny Everything, both of which are available on Amazon, Kindle Unlimited, and audiobooks on Audible. And they're available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. And then all the socials, I think my YouTube channel is Scott Urbach. Same thing with most of my Facebook. There's a Facebook group for my author part, and Instagram as well. But mostly it would be go to the scotturbach.com website, and that will lead you to all things about me.
Excellent. And what kind of content are you putting on YouTube?
So initially I started it way back when all your listeners will be familiar with. It was probably March of 2020. Remember, we were all sent home. What was it? We were all being sent home for 2 weeks to bend the curve, or whatever the saying was, when the pandemic hit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be home now for 2 weeks, and I'm going to do every project I can around the house. And I just started doing projects around the house and then texting them to family and kids and nieces and nephews. And they said, well, no, we want to see more than what you can just put in a text message, little video. Why don't you build a YouTube channel? So I did. And so the YouTube channel starts with a lot of home projects, and then all the other crazy and weird things that I've gotten into over my career, whether it's hunting, fishing, motorcycles, coin collecting, stamp collecting. It was kind of wide variety of things. And now it's kind of starting to focus in on the writing stuff. And then I got competitive, obviously after a while still doing it. It's like, you had to have, I think, 1,000 followers and 4,000 listening or watch hours in order to get monetized. I said, well, now I'm competitive. Now I want to get monetized. And I did. And so it's kind of a wide range of things that are of interest to old guys like me, I guess.
Well, like yeah, it's almost like a autobiographical
Yes.
documentary, live peek into or
Very,
daily or weekly peek into the life.
yeah, very much so.
Yeah,
That's right.
awesome. I will definitely have to check that out. You must be entertaining to have that many subscribers and that many hours of watch. So that's
Yeah, either I don't know if entertaining is the right word, but yeah, it was something that kind of took off more than I expected it to. And I still, even though there went a period as I was starting the writing part, where I wasn't posting much, but I'm still getting views and still get a check every month for the monetization, which is enough to buy a decent bottle of bourbon or something. So,
that's
so
all
I'm not
right.
complaining.
That's all
Yeah,
right. We'll take it. Just don't drink the whole bottle before you make a video.
that's very true.
That could be bad.
Although I do a lot of tasting videos, bourbon tasting videos on the show,
Okay.
on the channel.
Excellent. I'd be very interested in that actually. I just started dabbling a little bit into bourbon in the last maybe year or so. I don't drink it often, but I've had a couple that I kind of like. So yeah, I'll be interested to check that out as well.
Well, then
So
that's a great segue into travel. If you ever have the opportunity to do the Bourbon Trail down through Kentucky and Tennessee, that's a fun trip.
yeah, I haven't, but that's definitely it. Actually, is on my list. I talked to somebody else who has done it, and they also recommend it. So it's on my list to do. So before I get into the actual question of talking about the places that you've been, I do like to always preface or ask, I guess, before, like, how did travel become a thing for you? Was it a part of your life before you got into like the CIA and things like that, where you actually were kind of forced to travel for work, or did it become a part of your life later on?
Well, like many of your guests, I've listened to a lot of your episodes. It started based around the family, and we moved a little bit when I was younger. I was born in Illinois, in Chicago. We moved to California, but I had grandparents in Ohio and Kentucky, and then later one set moved down to Florida, and the ones in Ohio had a winter home in Hawaii. So we would travel to visit grandparents and all that. So getting some domestic travel in that way. As I grew a little bit, we did some travels being based in Southern California down into Mexico. Then I did a little bit more of that. I went to school in San Diego. We were, this was early 80s, so we were constantly running across the border, if for no other reason that the drinking age was different down in Tijuana than it was in California. So I did that kind of, a little bit of domestic travel, hit a bunch of states just because we were visiting family. It really didn't take off though until I joined the agency, and then it was work based primarily for 10 years, and then it's just I caught the I don't know if catching the bug is right, but because of my career progression from the agency to corporate security executive on a global basis across, I think I'm on my fourth or fifth company now. It was all a lot of international travel for work, and that's kept up to this day.
And you're retired, but you're not.
Well, I screwed up, so I retired. I retired a year and change ago. I was the chief security officer for one of the big three automakers here in Detroit, and took the opportunity. I'd been there for 12 years, did everything I wanted to do there, had the opportunity to take a retirement package, and did so knowing that I would do something else. But and so that's when I actually started writing the first book. And then I messed up and took a phone call from a headhunter, and they said I've got a client in Michigan who's interested in a senior executive like yourself to come in on contract and do some work for them while they find their next vice president. And I thought that was great. But then the more I spoke to them and the more involved I got, the more compelling the position became. So I got pulled out of retirement, and I now am the vice president of security, safety, and loss prevention for one of the world's largest restaurant brands. And so with operations in 95 countries and whatnot. So yeah, so I'm back in that game.
Well, it's incredible, but it sounds like you're back in it pretty much because you want to be. Like it.
100%.
So it's
It's a great opportunity, and it's a nice change of pace from the automotive world.
sure. So yeah, I mean, if you're enjoying what you're doing, it's not really work. It's
Absolutely.
So that's great. So let's get into the bread and butter, as they say, I guess. So I've told, and you've listened to me say this to other people. You know what? I'm not even going to say it. I'm just going to go right to you, Scott. Scott Urbach, where have you been?
That's it's almost easier to say where haven't I,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because I mean, first and foremost, we live in the greatest country in the world, and so I have been. Pains me that I haven't hit them all. I've been to 49 of the 50 states, plus Puerto Rico and some of the territories. I still have not checked North Dakota off my list, and I just got Alaska a couple months ago.
So should North Dakotans feel offended?
No, they shouldn't. I mean, it's maybe I'm saving the best for last, right?
That could be.
It came down to Alaska and North Dakota, and I hit Alaska. I almost don't want to claim Alaska because I did it on a business trip. Flew in on the corporate jet, landed, meetings, dinner, morning meetings, and we got back on the jet and flew to Vancouver, I think. So I didn't get to experience Alaska like I really want to experience it. I had always planned on, taking my son or, the other members of the family and, going up to Alaska and getting on a float plane and flying off and doing a trip or something, but didn't do that. So North Dakota is definitely, I will definitely check that off, someday in the not too distant future, I hope. Then internationally, it's been, I think I've been on, most of the continents with a heavy, from my government days, and it was heavily in Middle East, North Africa, Africa, some South America, and then as the corporate career went, then I expanded into Eastern Europe and heavily into Asia, Central America, and then then when I was finally able to travel for fun and vacation, all that, then it's the Caribbean and all those. So I think I've lost count, but I think I'm 70-ish countries
Jeez.
in the last. So I guess I've been at this 40 some years. So yeah, about 70 countries.
Yeah, that's not bad. That's
No,
not bad.
it's not terrible.
And some of them you can talk about.
Yeah, I can talk about most of them, quite frankly, and and some and I was very fortunate because of my role in the agency, and I had the opportunity to go to places that I probably never would have gone to before. Think the Khyber Pass in Pakistan, overlooking Afghanistan, or or Oman, or Jordan, or places like that, other parts of Pakistan that you wouldn't be at the top of a normal tourist type bucket list.
Sure.
So I had the opportunity to go to some unique places, some difficult places in difficult times. So from that perspective was very interesting. And then some of that carried on into the corporate career, because again, if I had to go someplace, it was generally because there was a problem and that I had to go solve. Up until later in my career, I started to go to some places that weren't so terrible, but we had one of my companies was headquartered first in Bermuda and then in Zurich. So I'd be going for board meetings, and I did, let's say, 20 some trips to Bermuda, but I was never there for more than 18 hours. Again, flying on the plane, meetings, dinners, meetings, back out. So people always say, "Oh, you're in Bermuda. You must have had a great time at the beach or on the golf course." I said, "No, I never saw the beach. I saw it as I flew in. Never once dipped my toes in the water."
Oh gosh. Well, okay. So I have two questions for you. The first one, can you start with what's like the one place that you maybe went to with the agency that like maybe we wouldn't think of as being beautiful, or maybe even just a part of it was beautiful. So like, is there a place that you can name? And then my second question real quick is, are we gonna have to send this off to the CIA before we?
No.
Okay.
No, this doesn't have to go to
Will
the
we get
pre-publication
redacted?
review board. Yeah, I'll just have to be careful with what I say. Well, and you're an experienced traveler, and all your listeners are. You can find beauty in almost any place, right? Even in some of the more difficult areas where, and this wasn't an agency visit. This was like South Africa, for instance. You have the vast beauty in Cape Town of the coast and Table Mountain and really beautiful vistas, but then that's contradicted by the abject poverty in the townships. So it's, in some cases you have to look past some of the more unfortunate areas and circumstances to find the beauty in other places. So, and I always tried to look at it from the most, I guess,
Like objective.
forgiving and compelling way to
Mhm.
say, let me find the good in everywhere that we're going. So
Was there a place that like surprised you? Because just from living in the U.S., obviously you're looking at it from a different lens depending on when you were going to places. But sometimes there's just places we hear about is the bad, or all we hear about is the destruction that's there, or because there was fighting, or whatever the case is.
yeah,
And so we don't think about the fact that there are still some beautiful places, or
yeah, absolutely. And one place that kind of sticks out is I was on assignment. I was in Jordan, and I'd flown in, and it's the immediate areas of the big cities are typical to that region. They're overbuilt and overdeveloped and whatnot. And but then I was able to, as part of where we were going, I was able to make a little side trip over to the ancient city of Petra. And I don't know if your listeners are familiar with it. Petra is I think a 4th century BC ancient city that was literally carved into this rose-colored sandstone in these canyons. Stunningly beautiful. And it was a stark contrast to some of the areas outside, or the main cities there. So someplace like that kind of sticks out.
Sure, absolutely. That sounds awesome. I can't remember if anyone's brought that up to me or not. I feel like maybe, but I talk to so many people, I guess. So sometimes
Sure.
the stories and stuff gets kind of muddled in my mind.
Right.
So is there a place that stands out to you when you're sitting down and talking with a friend, and you just start swapping stories or whatever, that kind of just sticks out as this is probably like my favorite travel story to tell? Like, we want to start there and kind of work our way
Yeah,
around.
one of them could be a trip. This was in the agency that we took to Kenya, and so all of the trips were 99% business. Again, we were flying in. We had a specific mission. We were going in to do it, and one of my roles that I had for 5 years or so was as the what was at that time called the DCI, the Director of Central Intelligence Agency, the DCI's protective staff. We hated the comparison, but for your listeners, think of the Secret Service for the agency. So we were charged with protecting the director and deputy director and their families. And then when he was out traveling, we would be with them on official visits as they were doing their things around the world. So 99% of the work was high stress, very difficult and technical work to make sure that we were doing everything we could with the right security package and the right motorcades and the right liaison with local intelligence services and law enforcement services and all that to make sure it was a safe trip. Everyone comes home from it.
Were you almost like working basically every minute that you were awake sometimes?
Oh, 100%. So unless you were working like mid, so if I was working midnight shift, then I'm obviously up and alert working midnight shift, and then should be sleeping during the day. But in that situation, you might be able to sneak off to do a little bit of sightseeing on your own if you were someplace, or if you were on part of the advanced team, before the official party arrived, you'd have some opportunity to look at some things.
Mm-hmm.
But occasionally there would be a day built in for the official party, especially on a long trip. Some of these trips would last several weeks, where it would be multiple stops around the world, and the advanced teams would leapfrog each other, and the official party would eventually get burned out, and there would be an opportunity for either a down day, or the local service or government would say, hey, let's do something more relaxing. And so this one instance was in Kenya, and I was on the advanced team for Kenya, and part of our stop was one of these rest days, and it was built in to be out at the Quechua safari camp out in the Masai Mara game reserve area. And so that was one of these instances where we still performed our protective function, but the threat level out there in the bush versus in Nairobi was extremely different. I mean, to the point where, the embassy that I was working out of in Nairobi at that time, several years later, got bombed, and a lot of people got killed there. So we were out in the bush where we were still doing our protective thing, but a little bit more relaxed. And that was one of these instances where we can relax a little bit and then enjoy. You want to talk about beautiful? Enjoy the vast savannah there, and a morning and afternoon game drive in a luxury tented safari type camp environment, which was really something. And that's one that, if I had places that I would like to bring the family back to someday, and this is, again, almost 40 years ago, is something that, I would definitely like to do. But that says there's always a little twist to a story. And in this case, we loaded back up. We were there a day or day and a half, something like that. And we loaded back up on it was a Kenyan Air Force. I can't remember the type of aircraft it was. It was a 4-prop aircraft. I think it was called a Buffalo or something. But anyway, we all loaded back up on this thing. And we landed on this dirt strip out in the middle of nowhere. And we're all ready to go. And thing won't start. And I'm looking out the window, and some guy's climbing up on a ladder and looking at the engine, and they came back and said, plane won't start. I don't know what they would do now. Technology's changed so much since I was there, but we had our communications expert with us, and we pulled out this highly classified, satellite communications gear, set it up out there in the middle of this dirt runway to be able to call to headquarters to say, hey, we're stuck. We need some, A, we're stuck and we're going to be delayed on our next stop. B, we need another aircraft. And we sat around now we're waiting hours for another aircraft to show up. It eventually does, same type of aircraft. And they taxi up close to us. Now, my team and I, we're all packing up our gear, getting ready to transfer to the new aircraft. But I looked out the window again, and they were literally stretching jumper cables of some sort from the new aircraft to the old one. And we're all looking at each other like, wait a minute, we want to be on that one. And no, they came over and they hit it with a hammer, and they did whatever they did. Ours fired up, and then we flew out on that one.
A couple zip ties.
That was a little, yeah, exactly, a little duct tape, and so that was a little white knuckle-ish, getting out of there.
Well, clearly you made it okay, so that's good
Yes,
news.
we did.
That's good news.
It all ended well.
What can you say, was there ever a time, not was there ever a time that you felt in fear for your life, but was it ever really close?
No, I mean, there were plenty of those where, I can't remember now. I think it was Egypt, and I was working mids, and so I'm in the command post working mids, my partner and I, and all of a sudden there's automatic weapons fire outside the hotel. And so, that put us into a whole thing. Now, it had nothing to do with us, it turned out, which is good. But, now we're in the proximity of that, and that, then we have to go in and start doing our thing. And then we had other situations. The closest I ever came, and I think I can talk about this. We were touring. This was during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and we were touring a Mujahideen training camp. And I was on point, walking as we were touring through this, and the Mujahideen fighters that the agency was supporting in their fight against the Soviets were showing us what they could do, and they were showing us how they were using the weapons that the U.S. government was providing. Have you ever seen the movie Charlie Wilson's War?
I have not.
With Tom Hanks?
I have not.
Put it on your list, and your listeners should too. Because
Charlie Wilson's War.
Charlie Wilson's War. It stars Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts and some others, and it's about a congressman, Charlie Wilson, a Texas congressman, who literally single-handedly, according to the movie, and from my recollection, was pretty accurate, was the one to get Congress to support the Mujahideen in their fight and fund them and get them the right weapon systems and all that. And it's really a good movie, and it's about this time period. So anyway, I'm walking point, and suddenly he was a kid, jumped out of this little spider hole. God knows how long he'd been hiding in there, and screaming Allah Akbar and doing the whole thing. And they were doing it to show how stealthy they were. but they didn't tell us. They didn't tell me as a point man
Oh my
that this was going to
gosh.
happen. So of course I came, my rifle came up and I was, had 4 pounds of pressure on a 5 pound trigger.
Oh my gosh.
And the only thing that kept me from squeezing a round off was thankfully the guy is holding the rifle up, horizontal. He wasn't pointing at me. He's holding it in his hand up high over his head. So that scared me because A, I didn't know what was going on. B, afterwards, I'm like, I almost shot this kid for no reason.
Wow.
And C, I was furious that they didn't tell us. So that was one of the closer instances. And then there's all there's always worry about car accidents and nonsense like that. But
Sure.
in airplanes that have to get jump started before you fly out on them.
Yeah. Are we going to make it? What if
Yeah.
the battery dies mid-flight?
Exactly. I guess we can glide.
Yeah. Hopefully long enough to land. That's crazy. I don't know which direction to take this in. I'm just going to be honest because I feel like there's so many different ways we can go. Let's go, if you don't mind, let's go like maybe lighter. Let's go into maybe some travel that you've done recreationally, or when you're going for some of the business trips, you're able to spend a few days or a day or two actually exploring, right? Or maybe that's more now than you used to be able to.
Yeah, absolutely more now than I did. And like I said, Europe, I hadn't done much of Europe at all professionally because bad things weren't necessarily happening there. For all my companies were big international companies, so having the opportunity to go someplace with my wife, we've gotten into a habit now of doing a decent sized trip around our anniversary, especially the 5 year ones. And the first big five, it was our 5th anniversary, I think it was, and we went to Bora Bora. And you want to talk about a stunningly beautiful place. Now, I didn't mention that earlier because I expected it to be stunningly beautiful, and it absolutely was. And so that's a place where, it's a long way to get there, but once you're there and being able to be in an environment like that is it's relaxing and it's everything you would expect it to be. And unfortunately, I'm big into scuba diving now, and I wasn't at that time, so that was a wasted opportunity. I did have the opportunity to snorkel and swim with sharks and manta rays and or stingrays and things like that when I was there. But mostly, I was enjoying hanging out in a hammock in our overwater bungalow. Right.
That's funny. That's one place that nobody ever mentions on the podcast, and it's one of those things like I forget that it exists, even though it's stereotypically or whatever you want to say, like everyone, when you think of a beautiful place, tropical place, what do you think? Bora Bora?
Again, so
I forget about it.
The movie reference for that one is any of your listeners have seen Couples Retreat, Vince Vaughn
yes, very good,
and a bunch of others.
Yep.
So we stayed at the resort where it was filmed. It just so happens that that's the one we picked, which meant that I've seen Couples Retreat something like 700 times because it was running on a loop. Literally on a loop on a channel at that resort. I think it was the St. Regis in Bora Bora.
Oh, that's funny.
So no, if you've ever been there, you'll just spend the rest of your time thinking, how do I ever go back? So one of our first trips, my wife and I, was to do that, and then I think for 30 years we did a cruise, a 2-week European cruise, Mediterranean cruise leaving out of Southampton, England, that made stops all across the Mediterranean, France and Italy and Spain, Gibraltar, places like that. So it was a great opportunity. My wife had only been to, I think, London and Paris at that time, and so for her to have the opportunity to see a lot of stops in Europe, to be able to go to Florence and Rome and places like that. Without having to unpack and repack and get on a plane and all that. It was a great opportunity to do that. And then
were there can you tell me any experiences from that cruise and any of the stops that you had that stood out?
I had not been to Rome before. I mean, I transited through the airport, but I don't count those. So yeah, to be able to go, I'm a huge history fan, both US and world. And so to be able to go and see the Colosseum and some of the other areas in Rome, and to be in Florence in the grand churches and baptistries, and of course, we went to Pisa and saw the tower, and I climbed up and did that. So we did all the touristy things, but be able to even though it's a short snippet of being able to see certain things, and then be able to say, okay, now we know when we go back to Italy and spend just a trip there, we know where we want to go, and we don't have to do the touristy things anymore.
Right.
And we can start doing the more in-depth experiential things. So that was a good trip. Like going to Gibraltar, I would never have thought I'd go there. And so that was an interesting, this interesting tiny little place stuck between, the UK or a UK territory within Spain, and all that was something. And then our most recent, again, it was a cruise, as we were, and I've been I guess a good or bad influence on my kids. My kids are all world travelers now as well, and my eldest daughter was having her wedding in Portugal. And so prior to the wedding, and it happened to line up with our 35th anniversary, my wife and I took a cruise through the Greek islands, which was amazing.
Yeah, we did touch on that, didn't we, before, when we first talked?
Yeah, so that was a great experience, and by then I had gotten into scuba diving, so I did take the opportunity to do some scuba diving in Mykonos and in Turkey. We made a stop there, and being able to scuba dive on a crashed, sunken C-47, aircraft, and things like that is things that I'll always remember.
That is awesome. So how large is that aircraft?
I mean, it was decent size. It was busted in half too. I think initially it was intact, and then a storm busted it. So, it was hard to get the full view of it. But it's the size of a small commercial aircraft. Think 727 type size.
Unbelievable. Were you able to go kind of in it, or you just had to?
There weren't any swim throughs there. You get up to the, kind of look in the cockpit and things like that, and then part where the fuselage was busted, but it wasn't really safe for doing a swim through there. I am REC certified as a diver, so I am certified to be able to penetrate wrecks, and I've done that in the Florida Keys, diving, large ships like the Spiegel Grove or the Dwayne.
I was going to say there's a few of them down there, aren't there?
Yeah, there's quite a few down there. Those were all purpose built, purpose sunk for artificial reefs, but they're stunning to dive. So, but yeah, I mean, getting back to the family travel, I have had the opportunity, now to do those type of trips. And like I said, being able to travel to Portugal for my daughter's wedding made it just double unique, because I hadn't been to Portugal yet. It's an amazing, Lisbon's an amazing city. The wedding was in a stunningly beautiful venue, and then all her friends and family came in and used that opportunity, the destination wedding, to then travel other places. I think my son and his now wife, girlfriend, they went from there to Paris and London, and my other daughter and her husband went to the Azores, which I'm still jealous about. I want to hit that for the diving, which is a Portuguese territory, as you know, out in the middle of the Atlantic. They call it the Hawaii of the Atlantic. And that's high on my bucket list now, is to try and get there, to experience, that location. They loved it and thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, that's excellent. Are any of your kids also into like diving and stuff as well?
So yeah, I did. My son and his now wife got certified. I got certified. My wife was sick of me talking about it for 35 years, and said, just do it already. And we had a trip planned, a family trip. This is another thing we've started to do to talk, to get to the travel part, around Christmas. At a certain point, and I don't know how old, your kids and family and all that are, but at a certain point, my son doesn't need another watch for Christmas, and my daughters and daughter-in-law don't need another purse or, clothes or anything like that.
You don't need more socks.
Yeah, I don't need more socks and ties. So we've gotten into this experiential Christmas. And so it happened to be in this case, I was stacking up a trip. We were going with some friends to Hawaii for a week and change, followed, well, I think it was the other way around. I was taking the family to Jamaica for a week. I said, look, this is Christmas for all of us. We're going to go to all-inclusive adults only resort in Jamaica. They have scuba diving. It was one of the Sandals resorts, and we're going to do. So I wanted to get scuba certified for that, and then we had a couple weeks later this trip to Hawaii planned, where I definitely want to do more scuba diving. So now we've continued that. We've done a Christmas where we all got on a cruise and did a Caribbean cruise. So there's, and we're continuing to do that. I think this Christmas we're all meeting in California and I've got family up. One of my daughters lives out there. And so rather than, sit here in Michigan, everyone's going to gather there and, do some traveling from there.
I love that so very much, and I've had two different guests now that we've talked about how, like you said, once the kids start getting older, and we started doing this probably, I guess when they were in their upper teens, they might still get an iPhone or something that they want, but for the most part, we wanted to create experiences. Well, I have two different people who have no knowledge of each other that decided to take it a step further, and they both do pretty much the same thing. Now they'll take and have their kids. Now my one of them is a friend of mine. His kids are younger, young, like maybe the oldest is maybe 13 or something. But they will, every one of them, there's 5 of them total, they will come up with a place that they decide they might want to go, and then put together, like, this would be our budget. These are the types of places we would go when we're there. And then they kind of all take a vote on which one they want to do, and that's the trip that they do. So they pick that, they do that for Christmas, and then they, maybe actually do the travel sometime the next year. But just thought that was a really cool idea. Each person kind of doing their own research and coming up with some options, and then do like
that's great. And I've got friends that have done that as well. And my only regret is I didn't do it sooner. Quite frankly, if you're doing it with kids that are young, we didn't start doing it till my kids all of them were out of college, and I would have liked to have done it a little bit sooner. Just because those are the trips now that everyone talks about. No one remembers what they got under the tree from Santa.
Exactly.
2019 or something.
Yep.
But everyone remembers the scuba diving. So as I said, my son and his now wife got scuba certified. One of my son-in-law, or both of my son-in-laws, are scuba certified as well. One has been for a long time. So so all of us would scuba dive, and my wife's on board. She wants no part of diving. She's all about sitting on the beach and waiting for me to come back. That's or being at the spa. 100%. She's happy to have me out of her hair and enjoy a beverage on the beach and wait for us to come back.
Yeah.
And so I try and build that into most of our travels. Before we came online, I was mentioning that my son, when he just got married, did a destination wedding out in La Jolla, California. And again, people flying in from all over the country to be there on the beach in La Jolla, overlooking the water. And I took the opportunity to go diving the day before the wedding. Having those type of memories now is much more important to me and to our family than, the material nonsense.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let me ask you this. When you went and spent time in Asia, was that mostly business stuff?
Yeah, I don't think I've traveled there. I haven't traveled there for personal travel. I did, again, I was in the agency my first time I went to China, and there's a story there too. So, I flew into Beijing, and I was the advanced person there. So I was undercover my entire time in the agency. But when you're working and meeting with local governments and that type of thing, I wasn't doing anything covert there. So the local government knew who I worked for. And so I get there, and of course I'm jet lagged the wrong way, and it's 3 a.m. or something, and I get the brilliant idea to go out and go for a run because I couldn't sleep. And this was not too long after Tiananmen. And so I looked up, and again, this is before no one had cell phones or anything back then. So I looked up on a map to see, where I was versus where Tiananmen was, and it was a couple miles away. And I said, well, I could do that. And so I got up and went for a run at 3 a.m, not thinking that I was going to aggravate the local service, which I did, because they were surveilling me. And so, I go running out and I start picking up surveillance, and they're scrambling to see where is this guy going at 3 a.m. I'm sure they thought I was going out to service a dead drop or some
You're
nonsense.
running. It's not
Yeah.
a casual stroll. Not that you were
No,
sprinting.
yeah.
But...
Well, I wasn't sprinting; I was jogging. Yeah,
Right.
but so eventually, I must have really aggravated them, because as I approached the square, and the square was kind of still off limits. They were, and I don't remember exactly how long after it was, but eventually I got really close, and a uniformed member of their service stepped out from behind a corner, kind of lowered his rifle at me, and I quickly changed my mind, decided it was time to go back and go to sleep. He said, "Okay, I'm out. I'm going back."
Which that was about as far as you were going anyway, so it worked out.
Yeah, exactly.
It worked out.
Now I did. I guess now that I'm thinking about it, I must have been there another time, but it was a business reason to be there. But I had the opportunity in China where I had some days to myself. I wasn't in the agency on this trip, and was able to go to, again, do the touristy stuff, the Forbidden City and the Great Wall, and that's a vista in itself. If you have the opportunity, and I went to, and I apologize to your listeners, because I don't remember the exact portion of the wall I went to, but there's one primary portion that a lot of the tourists went to, and there's this other portion that was a little less visited. And so I got on the wall, and I didn't use a guide or anything. I was just kind of doing it myself. And I walked to the end of the, refurbished portion of the wall. And then to be able to look out and see the crumbling ruins of the wall that stretched to the horizon was an amazing sight. So almost all of my trips to Asia, which is China, Thailand, Indonesia, Japan, and Korea, have been work related.
And when you say, like, when you were undercover, like, are you talking like fake name, fake IDs, things like
fake the cover story, the employment cover story primarily. In rare circumstances did I use a a pseudonym, but this caused problems because my wife was agency too, but she was open, and I wasn't. So we had to come up with a cover story as to how we even met. I couldn't say back then, "Oh yeah, we met on the 7th floor CIA headquarters outside of the director's suite."
Oh gosh,
because I wasn't supposed to be there. I don't remember what my cover was at the time, and we had to have a cover story as to why the director of the CIA was at our wedding, because I can't say that because I protected him every day,
right?
And he wanted to come to my wedding. We came up with a cover story that my wife knew him because she was in the Office of Protocol, and that she knew him from interacting with him on, agency meetings and things like that. So yeah, the whole cover story and living that was again, that's another podcast episode in itself.
Do you remember how you supposedly met?
No, I don't remember. What we came up with. And again, we couldn't say we met on on some computer app because they didn't exist.
That's true.
So I think we had to say we did it the old-fashioned way. We met it in a bar in Georgetown or something like that.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, hey, it works.
Yeah,
it works. So let's where are some of the just favorite places for you that you've been that we maybe haven't talked about so far?
That we haven't talked about.
Unless there's some more in-depth stories and memories that you'd like to share from places we have discussed. Either way.
Well, I mean, some of the, again, we talked about some of the difficult places, but seeing the history. So if you think about the Middle East and all the tragedy that's going on there, and I did several trips to Israel when I was in the agency, and I think I did a couple after. But going in and touring, I mean, Tel Aviv is one thing; it's a modern city. But going to Jerusalem, and I don't care how religious you are, and I'm not terribly, but to go to places where where all of these religions intersect in Jerusalem and in the old city. And I remember I was there during the first Intifada, and again I always ended up walking point for some reason, but I'm walking point with some, some soldiers, and we came around the corner, and there's this, this ancient old lady sitting, on this street corner with a basket of figs, selling these figs, and I could just sit there and imagine that, some version of that old woman has been sitting on that street corner for thousands of years,
Oh yeah.
selling figs. So things like that just kind of, get you, is to, here I am, literally the epitome of the modern, you know the modern person, flying around the world, doing all of these things into cultures where people have been living that same way, and thriving for, thousands of years. It's some of that was really, really interesting. And another one, some of them are heartbreaking stories. I was walking through a souk in Cairo, and I think I was off duty, and I was, going through this spice bazaar and various places, and eventually I feel somebody tugging on my pant leg, and I turn around, and this young woman, really not more than a girl, and she said, got very broken English, and I didn't really understand what she was saying, and she's like, "Mister, buy my baby," and I didn't understand what she wanted. And then she was literally trying to sell me this child.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
and I'm sitting there with this dilemma now, thinking, it literally raced through my mind. How can I take this kid, get him on the C-141, and fly him? This is a pivotal turning point in this child's life, that if I could do something about it, what could I do? I mean, obviously there was nothing I could do other than reach in my pocket and give her every penny I had.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it was a scam. I don't think so. I mean, just looking at that situation and what was going on in her life, and all of that, I think if I'd given her a handful of cash and walked away with the baby, I probably could have. But that's another one of these situations that, again, it's a heart-wrenching story, but one that I never would have experienced if I wasn't out there and going to interesting places and doing interesting things.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to hear about people living in poverty and just literally just trying to survive, but then to
Exactly. Yeah.
experience that firsthand, I mean, it's got to be completely eye-opening and humbling in a way, probably.
100%. Yeah, because there's only so much you can do, and you can't. I understand we can't solve all the world's ills, and you try. So that's kind of, again, these type of experiences built upon each other, where, like I'm sure 98.9% of your listeners and everyone else in society, we all want to do good, right? And so, as you see, we get the chance to experience not just internationally but domestically as well. There's issues all over this country, and as great and grand and beautiful as some places are, there's difficult areas as well, and they're worth visiting just as much, just to see, and experience what's going on in this country. So, and I've tried to do that as well with our domestic travels.
Sure. Yeah, and it makes you realize how fortunate we really are. Most of us really are.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
yeah, wonderful. Just
I'm
trying.
sorry. I think I took this down a dark turn. I didn't mean to do
It's
that.
okay. It's real life, and that's
Yeah.
what I'm interested in, and so I think it's wonderful. I'm trying to see if there's places that you've been that maybe I am interested in hearing about. What kind of travel have you done I know you've been to Central and South America. You mentioned a few places, Costa Rica, Colombia. What kind of travel were those?
So again, most all of those were business. Some of them were on protective details in my corporate career.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Like Colombia, where I'd be down there providing executive protection for senior level executives, or board members or whatever. So a place like Colombia, that was mostly for protective work. There were other cases of going for site visits where I wasn't really in protective mode, and that would be like Costa Rica, Ecuador, Argentina, places like that, where we were going down to, I was traveling with the CEO, but we'd be going down to hit various manufacturing sites and things like that. So unfortunately, most of those spots have not been vacation oriented.
Yeah, so no real interesting experiences in those types of places necessarily.
No, not necessarily. Other than, trying to figure out how to get to various places. The first time I flew into Colombia, um, again, I was advancing. This was on a corporate thing, and I landed in Bogota, and it was late. It was everything about it was wrong. I did it all wrong. In some of these more high risk locations, you don't want to fly in and arrive, in the middle of the night, and so my booking was all wrong, and I arrived in the ground transportation I'd laid on didn't show up, wasn't answering their phones. So now I'm stuck trying to figure out how I'm going to get from where I was to to the hotel, and there was a guy out near me that was kind of stumbling around doing the thing, and he was talking, and but I think he was French and didn't speak English. I didn't speak French, but we both spoke just enough Spanish. I took Spanish all through high school and a little bit in college, and I still only, I can order a beer in Tijuana. That's about it. But we muddled through, the Frenchmen and the Americans speaking a little bit of Spanish to be able to understand each other and then share a ride together to get to where we needed to go.
That's awesome.
So it's overcoming even the little challenges sometimes are worth remembering.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think some of those are some of the coolest stories, to be honest.
Yeah, and it ended well. I mean, we didn't end up kidnapped or anything, so that was good.
It's also good. But
Yeah.
speaking of adversity, like potentially being kidnapped, I completely forgot. There's something about a trip delayed involving Russia.
Yeah, so one of my more interesting stories is one I never took. So this was after my agency days, and I was in corporate, leading a corporate security function for a large international company, and I'd mentioned I was making my first trip to I guess then it was Russia, Soviet Union had fallen, and I was going to Moscow, and I mentioned it. Thinking back on this is years ago now, but I must have mentioned it to one of my buddies who was still in the agency. And so about a week or so before I left, I got a call from the COS in New York, the chief of station in New York, the agency lead in New York, asking to meet with me. And I'm saying, yeah, sure. So I went into town and met him, and he said, so you're going to Moscow? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm trying to think, how did he know this? And then I realized, well, my buddy must have put it in the system somehow. And he said, we strongly recommend you don't go. And I said, okay, you mind telling me why? And they said, and this was a story they told me. So, he said that the Russians were furious because the FBI had wrapped up a former, and he was KGB and became the SVR, but this guy was KGB. A former KGB officer was wrapped up by the FBI. The Russians are furious because they say he was out of the game. He shouldn't have been arrested, and they're threatening to retaliate. And through back channels, they're threatening to retaliate. And they were going to arrest the next former CIA person that showed up in Moscow. And I guess that was going to be me.
Oh my gosh.
So I said, good. Thanks. I appreciate that. I said, I have no interest in seeing the inside of Lubyanka prison. And so I canceled my trip. And then and I thanked my buddy. And then, I don't know, 6 months go by or something. And the COS calls me up again. He says, okay, you're good to go. And I said, okay, you mind telling me why I'm good to go now?
Right.
And he said, yeah, it got resolved. I don't know if the Bureau kicked the guy, kicked him loose and or what. But anyway, the issue had gotten resolved and I was good to go. And so, no, I was a little stressed making my first trip back in, but nothing terrible happened. So I did learn, don't go to Moscow in February. That was a little cold.
Oh gosh.
I much preferred, the second time I went to Moscow was in late May or June, and that was lovely. And that's another place. So you talk about places that surprised me with their beauty. And maybe it was, I don't want to say brainwashing, but the propaganda of, the evil empire, the mother Russia is bad, and the Soviet breadlines and all that kind of stuff. But the first time, especially when I went to Moscow in the spring, and the the onion domes of the basilicas there and all that, and the Kremlin and the walls. And that's there are parts of Russia. There's still the old communist Soviet squat concrete block buildings, but some of the historical places in Russia, in Moscow, are amazing.
That's awesome. Thank goodness for your friend, because we may not
I
be
don't know.
talking.
It would have been a better story.
It would have
It would have been a better story.
Had you gone there and had something happen and made it out. Yes.
Yeah.
But
just so you think about, I mean, and nowadays, back then they were mad because we did something, and it was almost, again, I keep making these movie references, but have you seen the movie The Bridge of Spies?
I haven't
with
seen
another
it, but
Tom
I've heard
another
of it.
Tom Hanks one, where it's the exchange of Francis Gary Powers when he got shot down with Rudolph Abel, I think was the name of the Russian spy that we held, and they did this exchange. I give all your listeners all these movies homework to do. So that's another great movie, but that was back in the day where it was kind of a gentleman's game almost of, okay, we're going to exchange the spies and we're going to do this and that. You kind of knew you'd get out. Nowadays, there's people that are getting grabbed up for political leverage.
Sure.
For usually doing something stupid, where they go in and flaunt the rules of, don't take your bag of edibles that are legal, marijuana edibles that are legal in Michigan or California or Washington or wherever, and expect to be able to stroll through the streets of Dubai or land there and get through and not get arrested and thrown into jail for 15 years. And don't expect to go into Russia and do something stupid and then not be used as a political pawn in this huge geopolitical sense and be used as leverage against a U.S. administration for one reason or another. So people really nowadays really need to be, and I just was reading, you might have seen it, some young woman, a Brit, that just got a life sentence in Dubai for what her mother called a stupid mistake, and it turns out she tried to bring in X amount of cocaine or drugs or something.
Oh gosh.
And then they're shocked that she's getting a life sentence in a place that makes it very clear you shall not do these things.
Well, there was just recently, just a couple of years ago, and within the last couple of years, the U.S. women's basketball player that had the like marijuana vape thing.
Yeah, she had a vape pen or something,
Yep,
right?
and
again,
it was not about the vape. It was not about.
No,
the vape.
It wasn't. It was about the political leverage that they would gain against the U.S. administration.
Sure. I mean, there's probably some places that you just don't even want to take a photo, like.
Well, yeah, 100%. There are places where taking a photo is off limits, especially something that we would think is okay, but they consider a military installation, quote unquote. And there are places that people would be shocked, that you can't do certain things. Like, I think even Jamaica is one of them. I think this is right. And that Jamaica, and there's some other Caribbean areas that are, tourists would naturally go to and wouldn't think that it's illegal to wear camouflage. I think Jamaica is one of them.
Oh, wow.
Where, it's illegal, it's not so much now, but there was a time not long ago where, all the hipsters and whatnot would wear, camouflage of various types,
mm-hmm.
just as a fashion statement. But it's illegal in some places, and you'll get jacked up by the police for doing it, for something as basic as that. So again, part of my job as a corporate security guy is I'm constantly briefing people on the do's and don'ts of travel and making sure they don't do something stupid. One time I had a traveler that got jammed up, and it was going into, I think, Saudi Arabia he had purchased flying out of New York or something. It must have been February, because he purchased a Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition and was reading it. Again, this goes back to the days when people actually read magazines.
He wasn't reading it. He was looking at the photos.
It was for the articles, but he had it in his briefcase or bag or whatever, and got stopped going into Saudi, I think he was might have been Riyadh, and got held because that's contraband.
Wow.
Now, I don't know if it still is, but again, this back in the day, it was quote unquote pornography and contraband. It would have been the same thing if he had a bottle of scotch in his bag. And so things that the uninitiated or uneducated or just clueless. I hate the term ugly American, but some people travel without thinking about at least doing the most rudimentary research of what's legal, what's not, especially nowadays with the legalization of certain recreational cannabis and whatnot. Having that on you, going to the wrong place, you may not end up in jail forever, but you'll have an unpleasant experience
Well,
in some of these
and I
places.
think that's worth a reminder for those who maybe haven't really traveled. They enjoy listening to these stories, maybe, but haven't really done international travel. I think you're pretty safe probably if you're going to Europe or somewhere like that. But it's still, but some places you go to, yeah. I mean, you should do some at least basic research before you go. Talk to
Yeah,
someone who's
100%.
actually been there, or read an article or go to a forum somewhere.
Yeah, and even the State Department websites,
Sure,
you go and you
sure.
read the travel
Yeah,
advisories.
they'll give you tips there too.
Yeah, you can get the tips of what you can and can't do in certain places. And there are those Indonesian and other places where the drug thing is really strict, like Dubai and the UAE. But you can also run afoul of, like I said, things that people wouldn't think of around alcohol or other quote unquote vices, or like I said, taking pictures at the wrong spot, or just acting the wrong way, or just it's sad you see these tourists that carve their name into some ancient stone relic or something that just and they're shocked that they get in trouble for things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, or taking selfies in a sacred place.
Yes. Or yeah, I saw one the other day. It was some people that were incest. It was on TikTok or something that they weren't allowed. And I think this was in Rome. It was two couples that were upset that they had been not allowed to go into a church because the guys were wearing shorts
Mm-hmm.
and the women didn't have
Their shoulders maybe
the shoulders
were
covered or
bare.
something. Yeah, and they were upset, and but it's like no, it's not a tourist attraction; it's a church.
Right.
It's an actual functioning, element of their society, and you're disrespecting it by going in there and in flip flops and bikini tops.
Yeah, but that's
So
something. And I thought about that as as we were talking about these different things. I didn't realize that until we were traveling and we were. I can't remember what country we were in. I think it may have been somewhere in South America that they had, and this wasn't even truly a real church or cathedral. Not only that, but I was wearing shorts, but my knees were covered. They were long shorts.
okay,
But I had someone say it was like this was like a replica town or something, and somebody said to me when I was walking, I think out of the church, and I always know it, take my hat off, be respectful,
sure.
but I didn't realize, and I kind of wanted to say to the guy like, hey, listen, I know I'm okay, my knees are covered, but yeah, I didn't realize that it was that big of a deal until I traveled.
Yeah, but then and you learn it. Like I said, this all builds. The experience all builds. And for your listeners that haven't traveled as much, a podcast like this is great because they're learning the lessons that you and I and your other guests have learned the hard way in some cases, and they're becoming more educated and more worldly just by listening to your episodes, which I think is a huge value to what you do.
I appreciate that. I tell you what, I mean, I've learned so much as just being the host. So, yeah, I hope that the listeners get something out of this as well, besides just entertainment. But you know what? Hey,
Sure.
if it's just the entertainment, that's fine too. But
Exactly.
I'm looking at the clock, Scott. Not that I'm in any rush, but just in the sake of being respectful of time. Before we steer toward those final 5 questions that I ask every guest, are there a couple more stories and it can be anywhere in the world that you've been? Are there any stories, experiences that have really touched you, or just were super, I don't know, entertaining, funny? Like I said, really touching, beautiful moments. Anything that you would be upset if you didn't share?
No, I think we've hit on a lot of them. Again, some of the places, India, for instance, is such a vast country, and it's kind of like somebody saying, I'm going to the United States, and they only hit one little spot. They go to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Going to Florida is great and is fantastic, but you're not experiencing the United States.
Right.
And a place as vast as India I went there not in the agency, but as part of a corporate gig, and had the chance to hit a couple cities. But my frustration was I couldn't see all of it. I was in Mumbai and Delhi and one or two other places. But, a country as vast as that, it's like, you can spend a lifetime going back and experiencing everything you might want to experience there. And again, it's good and bad. You see, you get to experience the fact that driving down the street and a motor scooter, not a motorcycle, a motor scooter pulls up and there's a guy driving it with a kid in his lap, a kid sitting on the handlebars, his wife behind him holding a baby like a football. It's like, oh my goodness. And it just stresses me out.
And they're
watching
flying
that.
down the road, probably.
And they're flying down the road. I don't know if you've been there, but
other vehicles.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then there's, but then you have to watch out for the cow that crosses the street. There's a sacred animal, and they're everywhere. So no, I think we've hit on a lot of the stories, but I guess kind of some of the parting things is, there's some of these places that you can't say you've seen it because there's just so much more to see. So I would never say I've seen all of India or all of, the European countries are kind of small, but there's still, different aspects to each one that you might not get every time you go.
Yeah, and I'll say this: I've never been to India, but the people that I've had on the show that have, I think every one of them has been more than once, or at least plans to go back again. But some have been 4 times, just because
I'm jealous about that.
They fall in love with it so much, and so
yeah.
And I've mentioned this before too. That's a place I never really thought about as a destination for myself, but I kind of feel like I have to add it to the list.
Sure.
And I've also been told, like kind of like what you were alluding to. You can't go for 4, 5, 6 days or maybe even a week. It's got to be really, to experience any bit of it. It's going to have to be a 2 to 3 week. And I've had even one guest say he went for like 3 months just to be able to really explore. So,
right, and it's not to say that going for a short time, like I mentioned, on the quick hits we were doing off of a cruise ship in Italy, gave us the taste of it to understand. Okay, when we go back, we know now what we want to see, and we've already checked the boxes on the Colosseum and the Trevi Fountain and the Tower of Pisa.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we can focus on, the vineyards in Tuscany and something like that.
Yeah.
And get more immersed in the place.
Yeah, I had a guest on recently, and we talked about, I had been there twice to Italy, and she had been there once. And the only place that we had in common, and I've been to 5 or 6 destinations. She had been to 3 or 4 destinations within Italy, and the only place we had in common was Venice. It's so, Italy's another place. It's just so massive.
Yeah, and that's a place. So Venice is one that I want to go to.
Oh.
I want to experience Venice, even though I've heard pros and cons about it.
Oh, but sure, it's crowded.
That's a place I want to see, and
it's worth it.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. It's on our list.
Yeah, and it's one of the few places, and I say this too, I don't typically, once I've been somewhere, I don't check it off a list necessarily, but I'm probably not going back because there's so much more of the world that I want to get to, and
exactly,
I'm limited on time, unfortunately. But Venice is
time
one place,
and money, right?
Like, if and when I go back to Italy to explore more of the country, I will make another stop in Venice for sure. It was awesome.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. Let's do the 5 questions, and if anything kind of pops up, any stories or any memories that you want to share, we've got some little bit of time. So,
okay.
So, my question number 1. First of all, I didn't ask you this, and I don't know that we really even touched on it. Are you any bit of a foodie?
The answer is yes, and especially when traveling, I absolutely will not go to chain restaurants or anything like that when I'm traveling. I want to go to the authentic local place, experience the local cuisine, regardless of how challenging that might be. I remember one story. We were in Thailand, and I was with the Thai special branch at a function, and they were trying to get it. They were asking me to eat a certain thing. So I'm not going to insult my guest. I mean, my host. And so I ate it, and it was a kind of a raw sea slug type thing. And they thought it was hysterical because they hate it.
Okay, I was going to say, it doesn't sound pleasant?
No, it wasn't. The texture was bad. The taste was bad. I guess it's a delicacy to somebody. But, I'm there, and I'm going to eat what I experience, what I can experience. But they're just pulling a joke on me because even they wouldn't eat it.
Oh, gosh. That's great. So, okay, I was worried that we were going to ruin the first question. You did not ruin the first question.
Good.
because I don't think. Well, okay, so here is question number one. Of all of the places, Scott, that you've been in the world, where is, and I phrase this very carefully, your most memorable meal experience that you've ever had?
Okay, so we haven't talked about Morocco much, but it was one of these times where it was a down day in Marrakesh, and the director came over to me. I was the detail leader, and he told me, he said, for the sake of argument, I'm telling you right now, there's no threat against me, and we're all going to sit at the pool tomorrow all day and just relax. I don't want to see any radios. I don't want to see any weapons. I don't want to see anything. And I'm like, sir, yes, sir. And he said, we have a dinner following. Now, what I didn't tell him is I posted guys up in the balconies and everywhere else. So we had guys with radios and guns and all that. They just weren't sitting by the pool. And of course, I stuck all the rookies with that assignment. I was going to go sit by the pool. Now I'll digress here. So that night for dinner, it was kind of a big, elaborate dinner, and it was outstanding. The food was amazing, but at the end of what I thought was the end, they brought out this big steaming pie, a huge pie covered in crystalline sugar. It was baked golden brown and crystalline sugar on top. And so I'm thinking, like an American, oh, this must be dessert. It's it's an apple pie or it's something. And with great fanfare and flourish, they cut into it and served it, and put it on the plate, and out spilled this brown gravy type thing, and it was full of these little birds, some sort of bird, pie that it was like, uh-oh, but now I had to eat it, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah,
But that's one that always stands out, just because of the of how I tricked myself thinking that it was one thing and it turned out to be something completely different. And I've always remembered that dinner.
I feel like I've heard about that being, there's some sort of a small bird dish that's a delicacy in some places.
There is, because I actually looked it up one time, once the internet became a thing, and it's a delicacy there. I can't remember what kind of birds there are. I had another meal in the Mujahideen camps where they had it's 110 degrees out, and we're out in the middle of the desert and all this, and we're supposed to eat, and they with great flourish brought out a bunch. It was birds again, these little tiny birds that were all kind of cooked already. Nothing, you just like picked them up, and in some cases bones and all, you were eating them. It was something. But
oh boy.
Yeah, I've had some interesting food experiences.
Yeah, those would be very memorable.
I have had delicious meals, like in Paris, and there's a restaurant in the middle of the Eiffel Tower, and I was working, and we had an amazing dinner there with the best chocolate mousse I've ever had in my entire life. So there have been some really good ones too.
Yeah.
But those don't stick out as much as the the unique ones that that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't had the opportunity to do some of these crazy assignments I had.
Bird pie, like maybe they were magpie.
I don't know what they were.
Okay, this question number 2, you could probably have some really easy answers because of your time with the agency, and you could use one of those places if you'd like, but yeah, take it however you'd like. So of all of the places in the world that you have been, even if I said to you, hey Scott, here's a free trip, you would say, no thank you, I do not want to go back.
Wow. No thank you, I don't want to go back. That's difficult, because like I said earlier, I found something interesting in almost every place I went. Nothing really. I'm going to disappoint you listeners. Nothing really springs to mind like I would never go back there. Now, if I'd been thrown into Lubyanka prison, I might be a little gun shy about going back to Moscow.
Sure.
But no, there was no place that was absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
No, because yes, I've been somewhat or very fortunate, and a lot of the a lot of places I went, even if I was going to a difficult location, like, okay, you know what, maybe I'd say Cairo, because in my mind it's so overrun that, and I'm not saying Egypt, because I would like to go to Luxor and some other places in Egypt, but Cairo is a place that I don't think I would go back, but it would be fly in, land, go out to see the go out to Giza to see the pyramids. If I was taking, I don't have to do it again because I've done it. But if I was taking somebody, fly in, land, drive out to see the pyramids, ooh ah, there's a Sphinx, there's the pyramids, fight off all of the hucksters and scam robbers that are trying to con you out of your money there. Go back to the airport, get on a plane and fly out. That's how I would do Cairo.
Okay, excellent. And I've had people say there's really not a place they wouldn't go back. And we discussed, hey, even if you had a bad experience somewhere, just there's other areas. Plus, places change,
Right.
and we
Sure.
change. So, yeah,
Yeah, the inverse of that, I'm sure there are places that I've been that I love that if I went back now, I'd probably hate.
that's right. Yep.
Just in the passage of time.
Yeah, especially if you kind of glorify, like your memories are so grand that, maybe I think anytime you go back to a place, there's a great chance that it doesn't live up to your, the first time
Exactly.
being there and, the magic of that. So, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, flipping that for question number 3 is, of all of the places in the world that you have been, where do you absolutely have to go back to? And I know, obviously, India.
Yeah, India would be one of them, but top of the list, I already mentioned it would be, and not necessarily Kenya again, but a game drive, because I'm fearful, and hopefully we're getting better at it. But some of these places may not exist 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? So I would love to go back and take the family to either game camp in Kenya in the Quechua or the Masai Mara area, or Tanzania, one of those locations, and be able to get out there and see the animals and share that with the family. That's 100% one I want to do. Now it's a big lift though. It's a long way to go. It's very expensive, but 100% that's one of them. I'm constantly researching. You'll hear about. I heard the JW Marriott just opened a new tented camp I think in the Masai Mara, but then there's great ones in Tanzania and some other areas, and to go and watch the wildebeest migration or whatever. 100% that's one I want to do again.
Excellent. Okay, and so question 4, of all of the places in the world that you have not been, so, and I try to phrase this very specifically, not bucket list, because people's bucket lists can be huge. But if you could pick that you could only go to 1 or 2 more places that you've never been, where would those 1 or 2 places be?
So it would probably be centered around scuba diving. I already mentioned the Azores, which I think is obtainable. I think of Galapagos Islands, would be a really stunning one to go. And again, I have to think of, if it was just me, if you're saying, Scott, you're going alone, it would be the Galapagos would probably be one, because there'd be less there for my wife to do, and I'd be more focused on scuba diving. Azores, I think, would be great because she would go and have plenty of things to do there. And then maybe, I've never been to Australia, and that's high on my list. Another huge, vast country that there's a lot to see, but 100% I'd like to hit Australia and dive the Great Barrier Reef, and before it's gone. Right?
Oh yeah, excellent. No, I think that's a great choice. I haven't been to Australia either, by the way, but it's one of those places who talks bad about Australia?
Exactly. I mean, it's a place that I've always wanted to go. It's just, again, when I was in my, career of having to go places because something bad's happened, nothing bad was happening in Australia. So I never had the opportunity to go there.
Yeah. Excellent. These are great answers. Okay. And so the final question that I have for you is an easy one, because you know the answer already. Where are you going? What's already in the plans?
So already in the plans, I mean, domestically, I have, just a little one. I'm in Indiana next week for a meeting. I'm in Vegas a couple weeks after that for meetings. I'm in California for Christmas. So I've got a lot of domestic. I was in New Orleans last week. So I've got a lot of little domestic trips, some for work, some for family. And then I don't have anything international booked right now, but I'm always looking for the right opportunity to do something. And I imagine it'll be something tropical if I can. I start looking hard around February here in Michigan. I start looking hard for someplace that my wife and I and the family can go that's warm.
For good reason. I'm a Western New Yorker
Absolutely.
originally, so I know exactly what that's like. Yeah,
Exactly.
without question. Oh, this has been great, Scott. Anything pop in your head that you wanted to share before we wrap, or any just some final things that you'd like to say? Either way.
No, it's really been very enjoyable. I've thoroughly, your podcast is great. As I said earlier, I think your listeners get a lot of value out of it. I've enjoyed it. Hopefully, you're not going to get a knock on your door from the agency when this thing airs.
Yeah, let's hope.
I'll get the knock on the door first. I'll give you a heads up if I can. But no, it's been thoroughly enjoyable. I've really had a good time.
Awesome. Well, you've definitely shared some unique experiences and things that I would never get from anyone else. And I mean, to be honest, every episode is like that because everyone's unique experiences are unique and their own. But you have some definitely unique perspectives that we've not had. So
I appreciate that, and I hope I haven't bored your listeners.
yeah, and I'll make sure I put everything in the show notes as far as where to find you, and I encourage everyone to check out the book. I'm going to check out the book and the website as well and all that, and hopefully we'll stay in touch, and maybe we'll do this
absolutely.
again because you're constantly traveling, so who knows?
Yeah, I'm sure I'll be adding to the list. I definitely, you know what? I'll reach out and let you know when I hit North Dakota and tell you my experiences in North Dakota, and then we can close that loop, and then we'll talk about anything else that we forgot about here.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Scott. Thank you for sharing your time with me, and I just appreciate you, and best of luck with everything going forward.
Great. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.
And there's another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast in the books. Thank you so much for listening today. There was another great guest with some great stories, as always, and I hope that you will support all of the guests by checking out the show notes and going to their web pages, seeing any socials and projects that they may have going on. And please, again, I'll ask as always to like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really does help to allow the podcast to grow and reach more people, and I appreciate you for doing that. Also, if you haven't done so, check out the website, whybpodcast.com, where you can find blog posts. If you'd like to be a guest, please register to be a guest on the site, and check out the merch page. There's some really cool stuff if you're interested in representing the pod, along with some other cool travel items and apparel that I'm working on every day as well. Join me again next week for another great guest with more incredible stories. New episodes drop every Sunday just after midnight Eastern Time. Until then, thank you for being here, and have a great day.